evening, and thank you for joining The Breakdown with me, Tony Waterman. Here are the big topics we'll explore tonight. Which is worse, the fact that 500 million people's personal details were potentially stolen, or the fact that it carried on for 4 years?
Competition, soft pricing, you have a lot of natural disasters that they have to pick up on. How much of a revenue stream could this be for the insurance industry?
17% of all government spending goes towards bringing this line right here down closer to this line.
That hash code would change and it would alert people in the network. There can be a massive earthquake, a hurricane, a landslide that's going to cause a lot of damage. And then guess what? Waterman's is on the hook for some pretty hefty payments. Does it actually lower the barriers to entry, or is this just something for established companies that we're really going to see the cost savings?
But it is coming fast, and the disruption that it could cause could make blockchain seem old-fashioned. Since investors could lose absolutely everything on this, will this deter these types of bonds in the future? Do you think that investors are going to have the appetite to take on that risk?
It is now $150, $160 stock. Yeah. Good investment or too volatile?
Mexico for the asparagus, Mexico for the limes, Mexico for the avocados, Mexico even for these strawberries right here. So if there's any sort of shift when it comes to NAFTA, how is that going to impact prices? This year, it starts at 5%, but it climbs up to 12.5% after 2025. That's $11,362 per person. Even when one of these waves just comes and wraps you around the ankle, you can feel the force and the strength of that rip current.
There you go.
Wow, that is much louder than I thought it would be. And all of the wild herbs and plants are on notice that we are coming to find them.
Space has become increasingly commercial, a $380 billion a year economy, which is no longer about proving one country superior to another, but the final frontier for some of the world's tech billionaires.
Welcome back to the program. Tonight, we are throwing the spotlight on the hospitality industry, one of Bermuda's main economic pillars. We've just heard how initiatives from Friday's throne speech could impact the industry, but from the industry insiders, the experts, what about you? Do Bermudians still think that the industry is a viable career choice? Gary Foster-Skelton took to the streets of Hamilton to find out in this week's edition of Your Take.
You have a signed agreement.
Yep, for DeFoss Communications.
Because I spoke to the person that owns it, and he said that you guys have been in conversations. I just got off the phone with him, but that there is no signed agreement for this tower.
I'll have to go back and look.
What makes you so confident that this is going to work? Because we've seen in other jurisdictions that it's come back sort of to mixed reviews. I took a quiz to find out what the name of my non-existent child would be, and as I was clicking away to give answers, this app was collecting my public profile information.
Perhaps you've noticed that volatility has returned to the markets. It's not uncommon for there to be triple-digit swings in either direction, sometimes in both directions on any given day. And it can give even those seasoned investors some whiplash.
It's all about the memory.
Cue big fish. Got something, got something. Ooh.
You got a snapper. All right.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Those stories and more, but first, the global financial crisis. 10 years ago, markets were in a state of chaos. People were panicked, worrying if they'd wake up without a job. In the U.S., the collapse of Lehman Brothers triggered a cascade of events that plunged global economies into prolonged recessions, massive unemployment, and forced central banks to embark on unprecedented stimulus programs. Tonight, we look at Bermuda, how it fared during the crisis, and how prepared it is for the next one. But first, a look back at what happened.
25,000 employees, $640 billion in assets, an $85 stock reduced to pennies.
What's the mood like in there?
Oh, terrible. Death. It's like a massive earthquake.
It was a spectacular fall from grace, the largest bankruptcy filing in U.S. history. September 15th, 2008, the day Lehman Brothers' 158-year history came to a stunning halt.
This is really stupendous. This has happened.
This is a whole nother level of confusion. This is a how bad, as you said, does it get?
The world would soon find out, although few could imagine the depth and duration of what was to come.
The stock market is now down 21%.
Because we're now down 43%.
What in the world is happening on Wall Street?
Who knows where this is going to end up? I mean, this is volatility we haven't seen, of course, since way before you and I were born.
Lehman's collapse wasn't the first crack, but it rocked the financial system to its core. It exposed how vulnerable banks were to debt-fueled growth, and that there was no such thing as too big to fail.
The byproduct of that bankruptcy, and in fact, are still lingering behind the curtain in many corners of Wall Street. I mean, it was quite unbelievable. And for those folks that worked there, it was extremely unbelievable because most of them were stockholders and they got completely wiped out.
Housing was the main culprit. During the mid-2000s, a bubble was forming. Money was cheap, people were buying, and banks were lending to just about anyone. The mortgages were packaged together, the good and the bad, and sold off to pensions, banks, and insurance companies. They produced juicy profits and seemed low risk because they had top-notch credit ratings. Then, the bubble burst.
Across this country, Americans are worried about whether they can make their mortgage payments or keep their jobs or ensure that their retirement is secure.
The first fissures hit in 2007. As interest rates rose and housing prices fell, defaults piled up. By April of 2009, foreclosures hit their peak, more than 200,000 homes in a single month. Unemployment also soared. The U.S. was officially in crisis.
There was huge dislocation within the financial community, firms going out of business, extreme nervousness, doom and gloom. I mean, you could cut it like a hot knife going through butter.
Contagion was swift. Foreign banks were active players in the U.S. housing market, and U.S. banks were multinational. Plus, other countries were going through a similar boom and bust cycle.
International observers looking in at the Irish banking system realised that there was a very dangerous exposure to a single asset class called property.
Ireland, Iceland, Greece, Portugal, Spain, Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong. There were few places to hide from the global financial crisis. Unemployment soared, governments initiated bailouts, and central banks embarked on unprecedented stimulus. It was nearly a decade before interest rates were raised in the U.S.
The economic recovery has clearly come a long way, although it is not yet complete.
Things have certainly improved. Global unemployment is falling, inflation is on the rise. Regulations have forced financial institutions to take less risk.
I think the banking system today is much sounder than it was at that particular time. I mean, could it happen again? I guess. But if I look back over my career, 55 years, I mean, I've only seen two, and if you include the crash of '87, three time periods where you had this complete meltdown.
Meaning, yes, it could and likely will happen again. The question now is, how prepared are we? The Bermuda Monetary Authority has a message for investors. Do your homework before leaping into the shiny new world of initial coin offerings. In a statement today, the regulator said ICOs carry inherent risks and that investors need to take their responsibilities seriously, especially since unregulated ICOs carry no government protection. The warning comes as ICOs enter the mainstream and regulators around the world scramble to keep up.
Right now, it's kind of like the wild, wild west, and everyone wants to be in this gold rush. Everyone wants to introduce a coin. Everyone wants to wants to be involved in the ICO, in the digital asset world game. But unfortunately, lots of these ICOs, lots of these coins, they're never going to be fully implemented in the real world.
ICOs are an easy way for blockchain-linked startups to raise capital. But unlike the stock markets, they are largely unregulated. That has made ICOs popular with scammers looking to fleece unsavvy investors. Governments have taken note. China has banned ICOs, while South Korea has threatened to do the same.
I always say you want to be, once again, intimately involved with the company if you're going to be investing in the very initial stages of the ICO. So once again, you want to know the management team, you want to know what the game plan is, what the business plan is, and if not, then you probably have no business investing in that ICO at that early of a stage.
But that hasn't stopped a lot of people from jumping in head first. ICOs have raised nearly $4 billion since the first one took place back in 2014. The bulk of that cash was raised in the second half of 2017, as cryptocurrency prices surged and casual investors piled in on the hopes of fast cash. Despite the negative headlines and government crackdowns, there are legitimate ICOs, including Ethereum and Tezos. Here in Bermuda, a handful of companies are looking to launch their own ICOs, including sports gaming site FaceOff and would-be internet service provider Horizon Communications. The BMA says whether they need to be regulated will be decided on a case-by-case basis.
This is from 1932.
Yes.
This is sort of where it all starts.
Absolutely.
This pile of papers, full of deeds and death certificates, tells a tale of black land ownership at a time when property meant much more than just a roof over your head.
My grandfather's sister and their aunt were amongst the first black women to own property and therefore had the right to vote here in Bermuda in the early 40s.
For the Simons family, property was paramount. Naomi Schroeder is a granddaughter of Joseph Hillgrove Simons, who owned 4 acres of farmland in Warwick. He gave each of his 10 children a share of the land. But as the property passed through multiple generations, things became muddled.
The challenge arises if at some stage one of them doesn't write a will and we want to sell our jointly owned piece of property.
And that's something that happened. It wasn't just one person that didn't have a will, but as it passed through generation to generation, inevitably other people didn't have wills in place either.
Absolutely. So it has become a nightmare. And here, this is why you can see that I have all of these papers trying to unwind this ball of string.
The idea of selling the family homestead was first broached 15 years ago. Things ramped up last February, but it's been roadblock after roadblock. Papers need to be tracked down. Wills need to be probated. And as time passes, so too do more family members.
The division has becoming smaller and smaller, and members don't want to take responsibility.
The bills also pile up, including one for a trust and estate lawyer to help untangle the situation.
You get pieces of real estate in Bermuda that are owned by so many people. That's where you look around the island, you see derelict properties.
Jane Collis says she sees it all the time and that it's a relatively easy problem to avoid. A basic, well-crafted will costs about $1,000 and can last for years.
If you die without a will and you only leave a spouse, but you also have parents or siblings, the spouse is going to get 2/3 of your estate, but your parents, if they're surviving, or your siblings are going to share the other third. And I've seen that come as a major surprise.
Wills are also a good place to outline your end-of-life health care wishes, or to assign someone to make medical decisions on your behalf. And in the digital age, it's easier than ever.
The biggest thing is making sure that the documents are properly witnessed. It's very important that you have it executed in accordance with the Wills Act.
Besides tangible assets, there's the contemporary consideration of your digital assets. your photos, social media accounts, even your frequent flyer points.
It has value. If you have a small business and have a blog, you may want someone in your family to inherit some of the benefit there. Make sure you have the passwords and usernames separate and pass it on and let people know that there is a place to find this.
As for Naomi Schroeder, she says this experience has taught her a few things, like sell your property before you die so your heirs can avoid the headaches and the heartaches.
My greatest fear is that what was a cherished family homestead or whatever will fall apart.
An ending she's doing everything in her power to avoid. Tony Waterman for Bermuda Broadcasting News.
And they put the cage in the airplane, but the elephant wouldn't go in.
Even the most imaginative author would be stretching their powers to spin a Bermudian tale like this.
An elephant landed here in a boat because a rusty propeller broke.
It was August of 1954. Gunda, a 3-year-old baby elephant, was crossing oceans, moving from Calcutta, India, to a circus in the United States. But somewhere in the Atlantic, trouble struck, much to the unexpected delight of many.
The children were happy as they could be, a real live elephant for them to see.
The story spread quickly. Spectators swarmed, eager to catch a glimpse of Gunda. Nancy Valentine, who later wrote a children's book about the elephant, was there with her 2 young children.
Nobody had ever seen an elephant, and I mean so many of the children, because nobody could travel at that time.
It was front page news for days. But soon, a plan was hatched. Gunda would continue her journey, this time aboard Pan American Airways. She was hoisted off the boat, suspended in a sling, then gingerly lowered into a waiting truck. Operation Elephant was declared a success.
But when we got it to the airport, it wouldn't get on the plane, and the Pan American pilot didn't want to take it. So, finally, the pilot said they had to go. They couldn't wait. So then, that's how it wound up at Stephen's house.
And this is where we had the truck backed into here.
Stephen West was 11 when his grandfather offered to host Gunda at Shelley Hall Farm in Hamilton Parish.
Was it wide enough that she could fit through pretty easily?
She brushed it. She was pretty fat.
The farm is long gone, but the memory is fresh. Like most island kids, Stephen had never seen an elephant before.
And she was tied up over in this general area?
She was tied up just beyond that building corner on her back leg, and she had a stake, and she had a long enough rope she could come down into this area.
Stephen had unfettered access. He cleaned up after her, took her on walks, and found the way to her heart.
She ate 2 bunches of green bananas a day and a bale of hay. And when you ran out of food, she'd let you know. And at one time, she came over to me and I didn't have anything. She just lifted me with her trunk and put me right over a wall which was my grandmother's rose garden.
Gunda stayed at Shelley Hall Farm for a week. Then, on August 25th, 1954, her final farewell. Cars lined both sides of Front Street. Hundreds gathered, their heads turned skywards, gazing at what was truly a spectacular sight. Gunda hoisted up in a sling, her trunk securely in her mouth, headed for the top deck of the Queen of Bermuda.
On the Queen of Bermuda, she sailed in style, waving fond farewell to the summer's isles.
Gunda eventually settled in the Tulsa, Oklahoma Zoo. She died just last month, aged 67.
I never saw her again, but you remembered her. In fact, I've remembered her all through the years.
They say an elephant never forgets. Neither does a Bermudian who's had an unexpected encounter with an unforgettable baby elephant. Tony Waterman for Bermuda Broadcasting News.